Alright, so I've done videos on various array methods, for each, map, filter, reduce, and lots of others. What I want to do here is create a real-world example of how you would possibly use for each, map, filter, and reduce within a web page. So what I have here is a very basic HTML file. I've got a heading with a main container. That's this grid right here. And what I'm going to be doing is loading a sample JSON file right here. I did a call to the DarkSky API. I got back some sample data for a 24-hour period. And that's what the hourly section inside this JSON is. Don't worry too much about DarkSky. There's a video that I've made about the DarkSky API. If you're interested in that, I'll put the link down in the comments. Inside this JSON file, there's an element called hourly. Inside that, there's one called data. And then for each hour in the 24-hour period, there is an object that contains time. There's a precipitation probability, so this would be 56%. There's a summary, so what's happening during that hour. And there's a whole bunch of other properties. We're just going to look at a couple of them. What I want to do is I want to take the timestamp. I'm going to use each of these timestamps as an ID for each one of these divs that I'm going to create. I'm going to take the timestamp, convert it into an actual time, and then extract the hour so that I can write out the time inside each one of these. So I've got a div for each hour, and inside each div there's a span that sits at the bottom here. The span is going to contain the time. The temperature is going to be displayed right here in a nice big font. Then I also want to run through here, figure out during which hours there's precipitation, and change the background color to blue, and find the highest temperature within this 24-hour period and highlight the background color for that in gold. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Inside the HTML, there's a bunch of CSS. I'm going to make a code gist of this, so if you want to look at the CSS, you can do that. I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but it will be in the code gist. Focusing here on the main container. This main element is going to have 24 divs. Each of the divs will have one span inside of it. So let's take a look at our JavaScript file, because that's where we'll be doing most of the work. So I have a call to my JSON file. It's just stored in my local directory here, the same directory as my JavaScript file. I'm creating a new request object asking for that file. I'm waiting for the DOM content loaded event. So when the browser has finished reading the HTML, I'm going to call the init method. My init method finds the thing with the ID container, which is my main. So that is the container for this grid. I'm going to use a document fragment to hold all of my divs before I place them inside of here. I'm making a fetch request for this local JSON file. When it comes back, I make sure it's okay, convert it or extract the JSON from the response, pass it on to my next, then handling the next step in the promise chain. And here is where I'm creating the grid. So I'm not doing any of the main things that I want to focus on in here. This is just the setup. So I'm saying inside my JSON object, find the hourly object. Inside of that, there was the array called data. Inside the data array, well, for the data array, I want to do a for each loop. And then this variable here, hour, is going to represent each one of these objects. So this is an hour, and then this will be the next hour, and then this will be the next hour, and so on. So my for each loop is just looping through these objects right here. And the variable hour refers to the whole object. I'm going to create a div. I'm going to give it the class hour, which is what gives it the border and the spacing to align everything nicely like this. And then I'm creating a span, and right now I'm just putting in a placeholder piece of text. This 000, so midnight is the placeholder text that I have right now. I'm putting the span inside of the div, putting the div inside my document fragment. After I'm done the loop, I'm appending the document fragment to the container. And that gives me the entire grid. So that's the whole thing here. Now let's look at building the content, extracting the JSON data, putting it inside there, and then looking at how we can use map and filter and reduce in addition to the for each loop. Okay, so we have our div. This is to show the temperature. We've added the class hour just to give it the size and spacing. I want to get from each of these hours, I want to get that timestamp. So let's say we'll create a variable called timestamp, and that will be hour.time. That's the property inside the JSON. This whole object is hour, and here's the time property. So we've extracted the time, and then each one of these divs, we're going to give an ID to it. So div.id is going to be equal to, I will say ts underscore, because you can't start an ID with a number. So I'll start it with ts underscore, and then we'll put the timestamp onto the end of that. Just like that. And what we really should do is make sure that it's converted to a string. Okay, now our temperature to display inside each one of those grids. We're going to say let temp equal, and we want to extract the integer portion of this. All of the temperatures, if you look inside the JSON data, if we look at the temperature for each one, parent temperature, here it is. So here's the first one, 15.04. We don't want this 0.04, we just care about the integer portion of that. So that's why I'm going to use parse int, and I will get hour.temperature, strip off the integer portion of that. That's going to be our temp, and then that is going to be placed inside of each one of these grids. So div.textContent, I can just say temp. There we go. But looking at those numbers, it looks like a jumbled calendar. It's not obvious at first glance that this is an actual temperature. So what I want to do is I will take that string portion of it, and I'm going to concatenate onto the end of that. So adding to the end of the temperature the Unicode value for a degree symbol. There we go. So my temperatures all have the little degree symbol right there. Great. So we have temperatures in our divs. We have the summary we could use. We could write the summary in. It'll be a little bit filled in. A title is often a great place to stick a little bit of extra information that you might not want plastered all over the place, but if the person mouses over, they can get this. So we'll say hour.summary. Now if I move my mouse over these, wait for a moment, I should see a title appearing. Okay. There we go. Clear, drizzle, overcast, light rain. So I just didn't have the focus on my web page. That's why the titles weren't coming up. Alright, we have the title, we've got the temperature being displayed, we have the IDs being set, which is ts underscore and then the timestamp. Great, these are the first parts that we need. Now we need the span. We want to put the actual time in here. I don't want to write this 0:00 for every single one of them. What I want to do is I want to get the timestamp from that JSON data. So Timmy is going to be my time, create a new date, and we could say timestamp. We already have that variable right here. The only problem is with the timestamp that comes from DarkSky, because they use a timestamp written in seconds as opposed to milliseconds, we need to multiply each of these values by 1,000. So right inside here, I can do this, times 1,000. That will be the actual time that I want. My text content, this is going to become timmy.getHours. This gives me the hour, and then I want to put the colon and the 2 zeros afterwards. So we'll say get hours converted to string to make sure that this is a string, and then we're going to concatenate onto the end of that this portion right here. There we go. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's a 24-hour period covered. We got all the times appearing. We have all the temperatures appearing. Looks great. Everything's being appended here. Yeah, so we're good for that. Now let's move on to doing something other than just a for each running through and generating HTML. I want to highlight the times inside here where it's going to be raining. Now I could do that inside of this loop as well, but just for argument's sake, I'm going to separate it into a separate function. Maybe I would be calling on this at some other point in the future. So I could create a brand new function that I call from this point. I'm just going to write the code in line here just to keep this compressed a little bit. But we are going to use filter, map, and for each, and then we're going to use reduce for calculating the highest temperature. So one of these three, or one of these four, is going to be the highest temperature. It'll look at the decimal portion of it to see which one's the highest temperature. So we'll have a yellow highlight here, or a gold highlight, and then some of these will be highlighted in blue, showing that it's raining, or chances are it's raining during that hour. So starting with the same data, json.hourly.data, that is the array that we want. We did that right here, .hourly.forEach. We looped through each one of them. What I want to do now is I want to filter this. I want to extract just the time. I want to extract only the hours from the JSON. So I'm looking at this array right here. I want to extract only the objects inside this array where the precipitation probability is greater than 50. So here's 5, here's 56. So this one I would extract. And then the second one, 2%, no, wouldn't extract that. Third one, 5%, wouldn't extract that. I just want to pull out the objects where the temperature is, the precipitation probability is greater than 50%. So instead of doing for each and looking through all of them, I'm going to say filter, because filter will return a brand new array to me with only the elements that I want from the array. And so I can do some sort of if statement and decide which ones I want to keep. By returning true or false, I'm telling it which ones I want to keep, which ones I want to throw away. So again, we'll use hour as our variable. We're going to loop through them. We could put a variable in front here and then pass the array, the new array, into it, but I want to chain these together. I don't want to waste time creating a variable and then passing that variable to a new line and writing the map or reduce. I want to just chain them together. So we'll start by saying if our dot precip probability is greater than 0.5, those are the ones I want to keep. Return true. If not, return false. There. Done. So I'm looping through all of this, looking at each one of the hour objects, looking at this probability possibility inside of the object, and if the value is greater than 0.5, I return true, otherwise I return false. And doing that means my new array created by this code right here, the new array will only contain the hours that there's more than 50% chance of rain. Now, with that reduced size array, what I want to do is I want to extract just the timestamps from those hours. So I'm creating a new array by saying .map Looks very similar to what we just did. This map is being done on the array that was created by this. So this is a reduced array. There's fewer things, probably 6 or 7 elements instead of 24 elements. Only 6 or 7 of them have rain. That comes down into here. I will loop through the 6 or 7 things, looking at each one of them, and I will return only the part that I want. So I'm only going to return hour.time. There. Now, when I get to this point in my code, I have an array with 6 or 7 elements, and each element is only a timestamp. I've thrown away everything else. All I have now is an array of 6 or 7 timestamps. I'm estimating 6 or 7 timestamps. Because it's an array, I can do a for each loop. And inside here, looking at each one of those timestamps, for each one of those, I am going to get an ID, which will be ts underscore plus the timestamp. That's the ID for the 6 or 7 elements inside here, because I was using ts and then the timestamp for each one of them. So where I have matching timestamps, those are the 6 or 7 squares inside of here that will require the CSS class from here, precip. So I'm going to take that into here, and I will say document get element by ID, the ID that I just created, the TS timestamp, and I'll say class list, because they already have the class hour. I don't want to replace that. We added it up here. So I'm going to add precip to each one of those. And there we go. So we have 6. 6 of the divs have a greater than 50% chance of precipitation. So we get the blue. The class precip is being added to those. So there were only 6 elements left for me to loop through here. The map only had 6 to go through. The filter reduced it from the 24 down to the 6 and then passed it to map. It looped through the 6 and just extracted the timestamps. So by the time I got to the for each, there were 6 timestamps that I was looping through. That was it. Highest temperature, same sort of idea, but this time I want to use the reduce method. I want to find out the highest temperature inside of here. Well, I could loop through each one of them and just compare the temperature. So pick something really low like minus 100, and every time I find something that's higher, switch it to the new value. The problem is I need to know what the new value for the highest temperature is, plus the ID of the thing that I want to highlight. So I'm going to use JSON hourly data reduce. I want to reduce my entire array down to one thing. Now, something that people forget sometimes when you're talking about functions only being able to return one thing, methods like map, filter, for each, reduce, when they say it can only return one thing, that one thing could be an array. That one thing could be an object with multiple properties. And that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to use my reduce takes 2 arguments. The first one is a function to call. So I'm using the fat arrow syntax here for the function. Reduce takes a function to call, and then it takes a starting value. Now very often this is like a number, 3, or a string. But I'm going to use an object. And inside the object, I'm going to create 2 properties. A temperature to compare against all the other temperatures as I loop through, and a timestamp. So I'm going to replace this each time I go through with the new timestamp. If I replace the temperature, I also replace the timestamp. So by the time I get to the end, I know what the highest temperature is, but more importantly, I know the ID of the one that I want to highlight, so one of these four. So my reduce, it is going to have passed to it two things, as opposed to just the hour that's being passed in here, and the timestamp being passed in here. This takes two things. The first is the accumulator. That is this object followed by whatever gets returned from this function. So one thing at a time gets returned, and it replaces this each time it gets called. And the hour object that we had up here and up here, same sort of thing. It's the same object. Now I'm going to do an if statement. Inside the if statement, I want to compare if the hour.temperature, if that, so 15, 14, 14, 13, 12, 12, these are the ones that I'm comparing. I'm saying if this is higher than the temp inside of here, if my hourly temperature is higher than the accumulator's temperature, I'm going to return a new object. Else, I'm going to return the original accumulator, so with no changes made to it. Inside here, temp, time, those are my two properties. The temperature will be this one. So the 15, the 14, the 14, one of those becomes the new thing, the new value for temp, and time is going to become the timestamp, hour.time. There. I have now found the highest temperature and time from the 24. There's now one thing left inside of here. And I want to get the ID, so TS plus, this is the object right here, will contain one of these objects that was returned. So hiobj.time. That is the timestamp. So that is the ID of whichever one of these elements has the highest temperature. And then we will say document get element by ID. So that represents one of these divs. And we will say, like we did above, class list add. And I believe hot was the CSS class. Just double check. Yes, hot. This is the class that we want to add for the gold bold text. Save, and there it is, gold and bold. And so now we have a combination of filter, map, and forEach being called. ForEach had to be the last one because ForEach doesn't actually return anything. ForEach will return undefined. So we can use it as part of a chain. It just has to be the last thing in the chain. It's past an array that it can use. And then here we used reduce to take this entire array of data and reduce it down to one single object. So whichever object had the highest temperature, which was this one right here. And then we highlight it. All right, so hopefully that made sense to you guys. Hopefully you got a lot of value out of this, seeing some real-world examples of forEach, filter, reduce, and map. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.